Okay. And then there's things like this. Now, again, this goes 15 years ago.
Hey, what up, y'all? I got day two of the Diddy recap. Let's get it.
The Night Shark series was created to work and thrive in every environment.
As I speak right now, Cassandra Ventura has taken the stand. Now, unfortunately, in this case, in a federal case, there are no cameras in the courtroom. There is no audio in the courtroom. But we are going to do our best to report to you in real time what is happening with her testimony and analyzing her testimony in real time. And we're going to also be taking your questions about this testimony, about the case in general, as it progresses. So if you have a question, submit it on YouTube. We will answer it here on air. I'm not going to do it alone. I have with me here in studio Rich Schoenstein, trial attorney. Rich, thanks for jumping here so quickly. Really appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Big day in this trial.
This is a big day because she is victim number one in this case. I think it would be fair to say we probably wouldn't have criminal charges if it wasn't for Cassandra Ventura filing her lawsuit in November of 2023. We all know that the videotape of her purportedly being beaten by Sean Combs in 2016 changed the course of this entire legal saga. It came up a lot yesterday. She came up a lot yesterday. And now her testifying for the prosecution, I think a fair argument is this case either rises or falls with her testimony. So what has she testified to so far? Well, first of all, she's quite pregnant. She's about 8.5 months, 9 months pregnant. She's 38 years old. She explained that she was with Sean Combs for 10 years. We're talking about a 17-year age difference. She admitted that during the course of their relationship, he introduced her to certain sex acts. She asked to describe the relationship she had with him. Quote, there were violent arguments that would usually result in some sort of physical abuse, dragging, different things of that nature. Again, why is this important? He's charged with sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. He's charged with racketeering conspiracy, a criminal enterprise, underlying crimes like sex trafficking, kidnapping, arson, bribery, obstruction, and also transporting sex workers for purposes of prostitution. She went on to say that he would stomp her in the head if she was down. There was frequent violence. She would have black eyes. She would have bruises. She was asked by the prosecution to describe what a freak-off was. And she said, quote, it basically entails the hiring of an escort and setting up this experience so that I could perform for Sean. It involved Combs being able to watch with me, the other person, and actually direct us on what we were doing. Eventually, it became a job for me, pretty much. And by the way, this comes after the testimony of a male performer who says he was hired by Cassandra Ventura and Sean Combs to have sex with Cassie in front of Sean Combs. She described how their relationship was quite complex. Talking about these freak-offs when she was first introduced to them, she says, I was confused, nervous, but also loved him very much. She explained how Sean Combs ultimately controlled a lot of her life. She talked about blackmail materials, so videos that Combs purportedly shot of her during these sexual encounters. She was concerned that they would be published, they would be released. Quote, he had many resources to do that. She was shown the 2016 video of that hallway attack, as I mentioned. She confirmed it was after a freak-off, which is important, because while the defense would say this is an unfortunate incident of domestic violence, and domestic violence is not sex trafficking, she has confirmed that this was after a freak-off. This was in furtherance of sex trafficking. She says she was afraid that if she said no to him, it would make him angry. So again, we're going to get more of her testimony in real time. So far, Rich, from what I've said, what are you taking away from her testimony?
Well, obviously, this is a horrendous relationship, and she suffered a lot. I think the defense is arguing, in essence, that she was a consensual, willing participant in this relationship. It was a 10-year relationship. It had ups and downs, and the defense is arguing that some of the things she argues now she was forced to do, she did willingly, and perhaps even enjoyed at the time. So that's what we're getting at. But this is really shocking stuff for a jury to have to hear all of this, and I think see some of it is coming up.
Don't you think that there is a potential problem for the prosecution? Because we heard it, it was funny. We have a question from TDB. Jesse, does the male dancer's testimony about Cassie contradict the prosecution's opening statement? He had testified that he thought he heard Sean Combs slapping her, that there were instances where he saw him dragging her, but at the same time, he was getting paid by her. He was texting her. She was participating in these freak-offs. You wonder, this case is a thin line. Was it coercion or not? Was she a victim or partner in this? Do you think when you hear the testimony of that male dancer, and you hear her testimony, or not? Was she a victim or partner in this?
She was both. She was both. I mean, seriously. She was a victim and a perpetrator. What do you mean?
I don't think the jury is going to believe that everything was coerced and against her will at the time, but it doesn't have to. There's a massive power imbalance here. So even if she willingly participated for parts of this relationship, he has all of the power and he's using it. And the one thing you mentioned, I wrote down, blackmail video. That stuff's really important to the case, right? This is carrot and stick territory, but he kept, allegedly, things like these videos to keep people in line. And the allegation here is if she sort of got a little bit antsy about how the relationship was going, he would threaten to release videos that would destroy any chance of her having a career.
The defense would say the only person that was in possession of the videos was Cassandra Ventura. That's a point that they made yesterday.
That's an evidentiary point. I don't know the answer to that.
Let me ask you this. We have a question from Lauren, who, by the way, has this cute little, emoji, smiley face with the hearts. I like it. It's nice. I have a question. Do you think now that the prosecution has played their ace with Cassie, that they have more damning evidence to come?
I would expect so, because when you're prosecuting a case like this, you want to start strong. And I think some of the idea of putting her on in day 2 of this trial is to start strong. They put on a little corroborating testimony first, right, from this dancer, escort, whatever you want to call him, and now they have her, the security guard, and they get to show the video, that horrible video, and now she testifies. But it can't be the prosecution's plan to try this case that now they're just going to wind their way through some other inconsequential witnesses. I mean, they have 2 more victims, as I understand it.
Well, let's talk about this. The practical reality is, A, they need to get her on the stand before she gives birth, okay?
Well, that's true, too. That's true. Good point.
Yeah, because victim 3 is nowhere to be found. So they may have to make sure that
where is
victim 1
victim number 3?
But also, I agree that they started very strong with corroborating evidence before they brought her on, because what happened? When she filed her lawsuit in November of 2023, made these wild allegations, I think people said, how do we know this is true or not? As soon as that video was released by CNN, the whole game changed, because people not only believed that particular incident in the complaint, they believed overall all the allegations that she made. It seems the prosecution...
And shout out to Law and Crime for this.
Now, it's interesting thinking about this. By the way, I'm going to get more updates about her testimony. So right now, Ventura said, I thought we were monogamous. The prosecutor asked, was it made public? No, I was his artist, also his family, his children, meaning their relationship wasn't public yet.
Damn, my damn
Who was linked to him publicly? Kim Porter. Miss Ventura responds, how did Sean treat you at this time? We had fun. So a lot of this is talking about the beginnings of their relationship, and she has to concede some points, right? She can't just say, it was a disaster at the very beginning. I hated him from the very beginning. I was under a distress from the very beginning. There has to be an aspect to it where she explains, no, I started this relationship. I was young. I was excited, but then it devolved, right? In order to be credible on the stand about the story, I think.
I agree with that, and also to acknowledge that there were benefits to her of being in this relationship. It would, at least in theory, help her career. It would get her to meet people that she otherwise wouldn't have been able to meet. So all of that is true. There's nothing wrong with her conceding that, because none of that justifies being dragged down a hallway and beaten.
Exactly. And by the way, we jumped on here on air immediately as soon as we found out that Cassandra Ventura was officially taking the stand. And one thing that makes Law and Crime a little bit different than other outlets like that is our viewers. Not only do we value our viewers, but we are making content right now purely for our viewers on YouTube. We want to give you the most up-to-date information about this case in real time. And again, we are the only channel, the only news organization that is producing content for you specifically. We value that. YouTube is where the most hard cutting-edge news is coming from, and we want to get it out to you as quickly as possible. So thank you so much to our supporters. We are going to continue to take your questions for for a while now, because she's going to be on the stand. So let's keep it going. Again, thank you to our YouTube audience.
I know this has nothing to do with what's going on, but I want to say this too while I'm thinking about it. The news media, if they were smart for investigative reporters, they would try to hire some of these YouTubers if they were smart. Just saying.
Jane, are there any more witnesses to Cassie getting attacked by Diddy apart from the bodyguard?
This isn't just any button. It's a highly engineered firefight solution to saving your iPhone 16.
That's right. On September 20th, bodyguard. I mean, I don't know. I would imagine so.
Yeah, I don't know either. There's a videotape, so that's kind of a witness. But yes, I would imagine there are other witnesses who are going to talk about the relationship and probably talk about some of the physical stuff.
Well, they mentioned chiefs of staff. They mentioned a chef. They mentioned... One of the questions from the defense yesterday was, how is this a conspiracy, right? For a conspiracy, you need two or more people to agree. Who are the people that coordinated and facilitated this racketeering and sex trafficking operation are not criminally charged?
So I see two major hurdles for the prosecution in this case. One is what we've been talking about. They have to get past the idea that this is consensual behavior by other people who are behaving in a questionable fashion. They have to get past that. The second bigger hurdle to me is turning an abuse case into a racketeering case, right? Because yes, they have to prove that RICO is very challenging. You have to prove a RICO enterprise. You have to prove a pattern of racketeering activity. You have to prove multiple predicate acts that are violations of separate federal laws. It is hard to sustain a RICO case. We've seen some other cases where people have tried. That's going to be a major hurdle here. The fact that he had this 10-year relationship, and even if it's arguably true, he took advantage of her, he treated her horribly, he beat her, he did all these terrible things to her, that's not racketeering.
I say that the prosecution spent so much time yesterday in their opening statement trying to explain to this jury why it's a crime. Because it's not a garden variety trafficking or racketeering case. And I think the more they have to explain it, that's a problem for them. I think it's a weakness in their case, personally. Now we have an update from court. Prosecutor asked Cassandra Ventura, what was his lifestyle like? Ventura responds, he had all these assistants. He could get things done. He traveled quite a bit. And then apparently she's shown a photo, and she says, this is Sean and I at a strip club in New York, like 2007, 2008, Halloween. How did Sean Combs' moods vary? Day to day. Now look, he is charged with specific crimes that John Smith on the street can't meet. There is an argument here, very powerful, had all these businesses, different resources, different employees. He would be in the position to be able to carry out a sex trafficking or racketeering operation. That's what makes him unique, though.
Sure, but is that what he's doing? Is he running an entertainment and fashion industry, or is he running essentially a criminal organization?
By the way, we have a poll up right now. You can participate in it. Do you think Cassie Ventura was a victim or partner in this? Ready for this? 82%. Well, this doesn't make sense. 82% say yes. I don't know if that's yes to... I think we need clarification. 82% say victim or partner. We'll get a clarification on that.
By the way,
right now.
That's my answer to that question.
Oh, okay. 82% say victim. 82% say victim. Maybe based on what we're reporting on the testimony right now.
I mean, I think she is a victim if the allegations are true, but also she is involved in some of the criminal act. I mean, she's getting those prostitutes, right? She's making payments to them, allegedly.
Talk about
she's
it.
having them come, so she's involved in some of the alleged criminal activity. And that's an interesting point that wouldn't just apply to her. Other people in his orbit might be some combination of victim and co-conspirator.
Talk about it.
But you know what? That video changes everything, because the argument would be, what do you think happens if she says no?
Yeah.
What do you think happens if she says, well, I'm not in the mood for a freak off tonight. I'm not going to pay the dancer. That's what's going to happen. That video is arguably the most important piece of evidence, because it sets the stage when we're talking about coercion or force. Question from Angelina. How old was Cassie when they first started dating? I think she was 19 years old. So you're talking about a 17-year age difference. That's important. I think that's an important factor if you're talking about power and control, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that he's
Power
older
dynamic and
obviously
age
has
difference.
much more power anyway.
Sherry Williams asks, what kind of time is Diddy facing if he's found guilty? I have it listed unless you want me to answer that one.
I would say life in prison, but you can tell me specifically.
So this is exactly what he'd be facing. So if he's convicted of one count of racketeering conspiracy, I pulled this up because I figured people might be curious. If he is convicted of racketeering conspiracy, the top charge, that is a maximum sentence of life in prison. You know what the minimum is for that? Well, okay, that's life in prison. Maximum sentence for sex trafficking, life in prison. You know what the minimum is for sex trafficking?
So we've got the Clover Woods deodorant stick. This is great. I love this one. Wow, this is the new.
Minimum is for sex trafficking 15 years in prison.
Oh yeah, they got him on trafficking. I'm sorry.
Prostitution.
On trafficking, I think they got him on that one.
Rich, I have to tell you, I don't know about racketeering. I don't know about sex trafficking, if he's going to be convicted of those.
Nah, they ain't got him on
He's
Rico.
going to be convicted of
They do not got him on
allegedly
Rico.
transporting sex workers with the intent that they engage in prostitution. Their argument, as far as I understood yesterday, their defense yesterday was he hired people for their time and experience.
Let me tell you something. If he gets out of this trial only convicted of transporting for prostitution, that is a defense victory.
Yep,
they would
pretty
take
much.
That in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
I
pretty
bet.
much.
Because I think if he is convicted of that, he might not get 10 years. He might get, a short
House
amount
arrest.
and time served, his time already in the MDC. I don't know, but it wouldn't be life in prison. Would it be 15 years?
Yeah, he might not get full 10 years. He might not get the hardest prison term, the hardest
7,
prison
yeah.
life, right? He would get out. He would still have a life. He would still have his enterprise. So I think that would actually be a defense victory, all things considered.
So we have an update from court. I think she's describing what the alleged abuse was like. She talks about anger, zoning out. She was asked, how did this impact you? She says, greatly. The next thing I knew, I was getting hit in the face. She also apparently talks about psychological abuse. He'd tell me to watch my mouth, change my face. So, I do wonder, that has a strong impact, because there's another case that we're covering right now. It's the Alexander brothers. And they're being charged with sex trafficking. And the argument you hear from defense attorneys is this is a very novel way to charge individuals. That if you're talking about romantic relationships or girlfriends or flings, and you're taking them on trips, you're paying for their meals, you're buying them gifts, maybe you're promising things, romantic gestures, are we now in a position where romantic relationships are just on the line of sex trafficking, or where does it differ?
Well, here he is allegedly bringing in prostitutes to participate in these freak-offs and paying them for sexual services. So that to me would clearly be sex trafficking if it's true. It's not just about the girlfriend. It's not just about the relationship. It's about these sex workers that he is moving about.
We have a question from Trune. What about male victims? It seems like this case is solely based on women victims.
This case appears to be based on women victims. I mean, I've heard speculation too about male victims. I don't know where that stands.
Well, there's lawsuits. There's a lot of lawsuits that have been filed by male victims, and I wonder, do you think that was intentional for the prosecution to not include those in this case? I mean, why weren't minor victims? Let me say this. He has been accused in lawsuits of abusing minors, okay? Allegations, accusations, okay? Never been criminally charged. If you're the prosecution and you want a slam dunk case against Sean Combs and you want justice for all of the alleged federal crimes he committed, you know, the problem with the minor victim for a defendant like that is there's no consent defense anymore. Do you think it's like we want to be as specific as possible with these charges? We don't want to make this case overly broad. The bigger it becomes, the more risk it'll fall down. Thoughts?
I don't buy that. I think the prosecution wanted as many victims as it could get, but I think the prosecution had to scrutinize every potential victim to, first of all, are they going to show up, right? We have an issue with one of the three, whether or not they're going to show up. So they had to scrutinize that. And also, how are their claims? How are they going to be on cross-examination? How is it going to play? They wanted multiple victims. The only way this case is what it is because there are multiple victims. This is not a RICO case if it's just what he did to one person, no matter how horrible it was. That doesn't get you to racketeering. So he needs them. They need the multiple victims.
And that brings up a good question I have. If you read the indictment, let me rephrase that. There's been many superseding indictments.
Yeah.
It says alleged victims, right? Alleged victim 1, 2, 3, 4. But then it says victims including. Like victims meant.
Let's talk emergency food and fruit because I just discovered the holy grail. The Emergency Essentials Mega Fruit Kit.
2, 3, 4. But then it says victims including, like victims, many victims, including alleged victim 1, 2, 3, 4. Does that mean we're going to hear other people who are not enumerated as one of the alleged victims, but are just other victims in the case? Because I don't.
It could be. They could bring people who are other victims in the case, especially the way the case is pled, the way the case is being tried. Now, they would have had to tell the defense by now who those potential witnesses are, and I assume, well, I don't know if we would have heard about it in this particular. Usually you would have heard about it. You would see it on the docket, but I don't know.
So talking about this alleged criminal enterprise and how, based on the opening statement from yesterday, he didn't just have staff who were helping him commit the crimes, but also covering them up. Just now, an update from court. Prosecutor asked Cassie Ventura, how would he keep tabs on you? To which she apparently responds, he didn't live far apart. We didn't live far apart. He'd send security to come find me or a trusted assistant. Like who? David James, Christina Corum, who we all know has been a central figure in this case. Maybe not the criminal case, but she's come up in lawsuits before. The prosecutor asks her, was your relationship exclusive? Ventura replies, no. If she's naming names like David James or Christina Corum, do they have to testify, you think?
I don't think they have to testify, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did. I would think this is all planned out, that she's going to indicate some people and then the prosecution is going to bring them in later in the trial to verify, right? One thing you really want to do with a witness like this, the defense is going to say that she's embellishing. They might say she's lying, but that's going to be a little hard to do with that video, right? They can't just say she's a liar. But they're going to say she's exaggerating, she's embellishing, they're painting it a certain way because of the case. So you have to bring in these corroborating witnesses and whatever other corroborating evidence you have to verify what it is she's saying. So it would be very useful, for example, if she says, yes, David James came around to check on me on behalf of Mr. Combs, and then David James takes the stand and says, yes, I did that.
Yeah.
It would be helpful.
Well, and yesterday they talked about the defense, her lawsuit in 2023, her attorney being in the courtroom, that she has an incentive, a monetary incentive to fabricate this situation. Got a question from Daniela. By the way, we're taking your questions on YouTube about this case, about Sandra Ventura's testimony that's happening in real time. We're trying to update you as quickly as possible about what she says in that courtroom. No cameras in the courtroom, no audio in the courtroom, so this is the best we can do to bring you her testimony in real time. Question from Daniela, 3984, talking about the video. What version of the hotel video was played in the courtroom? Was it the sped up version? Now, I believe it was portions of the surveillance video, not the CNN video, and cell phone video that was taken by the security guard who testified, Israel Flores. He apparently taken a cell phone video of the surveillance footage to show his wife, but that became a big pretrial issue about what the jury was going to see.
Yeah. And by the way, that story was a little odd. I took a video of it to show my wife. For what purpose? I mean, that was a little strange.
Well, you're not going to believe this happened, even though he didn't report it to the police.
I think it's going to be difficult. I think the defense would like you to believe that video's been doctored somehow, but I think they're going to have trouble sustaining that.
Hey, would you like a civil law question?
Yes, please.
Yes, this is our litigator here. Question from Teodora Bodorova. Can Cassie sue Diddy again if Diddy's found guilty as charged?
So, Cassie, if you remember, sued Diddy, and that was the first thing we really heard about this. That was before the video. There was this blockbuster lawsuit in November of 2023 that really put these allegations out there, and she was very detailed. In fact, the front page of her lawsuit had a trigger warning on it. It was so detailed. That case was settled the next day, and I would have to think that the settlement included an agreement that she wouldn't sue him again for anything. Usually, if you're going to settle like that and pay the kind of money she would have gotten paid for settling that lawsuit, you get what is known as a general release. And a general release means you don't sue me for anything that happened. Now, here's one caveat. Up to the date of this agreement. Up to the date of this agreement. So then if you the next day punch me in the face, I have a new lawsuit against you.
Yeah.
Right? But at least up to the agreement, she can't go back now and say, I want more money.
Well, for the same conduct, right? I mean, if it comes out that he did something to her, or allegedly did something to her after the agreement was signed.
Yeah. Presumably they got it. And it also, you have to make sure the release covers all of his companies, all of these other individuals who were involved. It has to be a general release of everybody. You don't want to...
Grief is a big part of what we do as funeral service professionals. You can't expect everyone to grieve the same.
I think the best thing to do if a family is in shock over a death is to let them know that you're there for them. Be there as a presence. I know we sometimes have questions and we want to ask about the nature of the death and the details, but do understand it's not about you. It's not the right time to ask those questions. The right time and the thing to do is to be present for that family with a listening ear, a hug, and to be their physical presence. If they need errands ran, if they need food, just be there for them to do whatever it is that they need and to support them.
Everyone handles grief in different ways, and we try to be equipped to help those people through that grieving process. Just listen. The most important thing you can do for someone who's grieving is to hear how they feel.
And there are times when they may want to have a cup of coffee and talk about memories and talk about the impact that their loved one had on them and talk about how it feels to deal with that loss. And it's okay to sit there and to just listen to them and share that with them. It's to understand that it's not about you. It is not about you. It is about that person that's grieving. Sometimes we want to stop the pain and help take the pain away from them, but the pain is not going to go away.
A lot of people say, I don't know what to say, and there's a reason for that. It's because you shouldn't say anything. You just have to let them know that you care. Traumatic loss brings traumatic grief many times, so they need that presence. They need to know that someone's there to care for them and to lean on in their lives. Our instinct is to try to cheer up, but don't. It's important for that person to have their opportunity to grieve. You can best support someone going through the grieving process simply by being there. One of the most important things is your presence. It's just like the way you spell love is T-I-M-E. If you show your love to someone by giving your time to them, and the most important thing that you can do while you're giving your time is listen to those who are grieving.
Of everybody, you don't want to leave any wiggle room to have a lawsuit.
We have a follow-up question to this from Fads. So why did he settle if he was innocent?
Yeah, why?
Well, I mean, people settle all the time when they think they're not liable. People, like, the thing that really surprised me when that case was filed is that the case was filed. Typically in a case like that, you draft the complaint and you send it to the defendant and you say, "Dear sir, please pay me a boatload of money or I'm going to file this publicly in court." And if there's any merit to it, or just for publicity reasons, the defendant decides to negotiate and pay, and it never goes to court. So it fascinated me at the time that she actually filed that publicly and he settled it the next day. That unfortunately was pretty telling, that he didn't put up any fight on the lawsuit. He didn't even want to litigate it. He didn't even want to go to discovery. He wanted to settle it immediately.
And if he would have settled it before she filed it, I think we would have been in a very different position than we are today.
No, I totally agree, because that lawsuit, I think, is what sets this ship sailing.
I agree. Okay, update from court. Prosecutor asked Cassandra Ventura, "Did you see other men?" Cassandra Ventura.
Sorry about that.
Cassandra Ventura, "Did you see other men?" Cassandra Ventura responds, "Yes." Prosecutor asks, "Did Sean see other women?" Ventura responds, "Yes. He said, 'I am Puff Daddy. I was insanely jealous.' Did you move to LA with him?" "Yes. He wanted to be close to his kids who were there." Goes to a theme from yesterday, where the defense owned up and said, "Yeah, he's jealous, he's angry, he's violent. He engaged in domestic violence." That 2016 video is indefensible. When you hear her testify like that, does it help the defense? Does it help the prosecution? Because the defense got in front of it. They didn't say he's a saint.
Well, it helps the prosecution, but the defense did the correct thing in opening statement, and they had to do it. They didn't have any choice. I mean, the defense couldn't walk into this trial and say he's the victim of a conspiracy to invent evidence against him. That was never going to work. The thing's on video, and there's lots of other evidence. So they were going to have to say he is not a delightful guy. You people on the jury probably aren't going to like things that he did. He did engage in things we consider domestic violence, but this is a racketeering case. And I liked that about the opening statement. They made that very clear. You're going to have to judge the crimes alleged here, not whether you like him or dislike him.
P. Diddy's trial is underway, but did the prosecution expose a weakness in their own case on day one? Did the defense reveal they may not really have a defense when it comes to one charge? And what can we glean from the legal strategies of both sides as we analyze the major arguments, statements, and evidence from the start of Sean Combs' criminal trial? Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Okay, so let me tell you what we're going to do here on Sidebar. Okay, so we're not only going to do daily recaps of the Diddy trial, but we are also going to do more in-depth legal breakdowns of key issues that happen every day in court, because that's key. What is the law? Who's winning the case? What are the legal points being made? What's the strategy? And by the way, talking about what we're going to talk about today, did the prosecution expose a weakness in their case? Did the defense do so too? Yesterday, we did a full breakdown of day one of the trial of Sean Diddy Combs as he faces sex trafficking, racketeering, prostitution charges. I brought on Elizabeth Milner, who was in that courtroom. You can check it out on our two-page full breakdown about what happened, finalizing the jury, opening statements, first witness testimony. But now, I want to talk about the legal significance of what may have happened and who may be winning. So to do that, let me bring in law and crime general counsel, Elizabeth Boulay. Elizabeth, good to see you. Do I have your title right? Do I call you legal counsel? Law and crime lawyer? What do you like to be called?
That's perfect. Technically, it's head of legal affairs, but general counsel, all that is good.
General counsel. All right. Opening statements. We know they're not evidence, but they are important, right?
Yes, yeah, they're really important. As you said, they're not evidence, but they set the tone for what the themes are going to be for both sides, both for the prosecution and the defense. I think they both struck certain themes, and it's also the first time that the jury is hearing from either side, right? So I think things like, you know, obviously the content, the tone, the delivery, all of that is really, really important. And it's sort of like, I like to say, an introductory paragraph, if you're want to think about it in terms of an essay or a paper for all the academics out there. And it's sort of a preview of what's to come.
Were you surprised how short they were? Because sometimes you have opening statements that can last the whole day, and particularly if you're talking about a complicated RICO case or a sex trafficking case with multiple victims. I thought that you were going to have the prosecution do their whole opening statement, then go to lunch, then have the defense, and then call it a day. We heard witness testimony too yesterday.
Yeah, it was really fast. I think it's in line with how the prosecution has been moving for this entire case. They've moved extremely quickly. The fact that this has gone to trial less than a year since the actual indictment, I think it falls in line with that. I think prosecutors are taking a really no-nonsense approach. They started off, with their witnesses and the type of testimony that came out yesterday. They didn't hold back. They started off strong and quickly. I think that's how they want to move in this case.
I want to start with the opening statement from the prosecution, more specifically prosecutor Emily Johnson. And what she did, in my opinion, was really focused on the elements of these charges. That Combs ran a criminal enterprise, that he engaged in crimes for years, that he used his business and associates to commit crimes and cover up the evidence of the crimes, laying out some of the underlying predicate acts or crimes that make up the racketeering charge, like kidnapping, drug trafficking, arson, bribery, obstruction, that Combs allegedly used lies, drugs, threats, violence to force and coerce victims like Cassie Ventura and Jane, who we believe is now victim 2, into these sex acts against their will, that there was a coordination of payments and transportation of sex workers. Elizabeth, to me, and this is my thesis, I felt there's a weakness in the prosecution's case that was exposed yesterday in the opening statement. It seemed to me, and I'm curious your thoughts, the prosecution spent so much time yesterday trying to explain to the jury that this is a crime, because this doesn't feel like a garden variety racketeering or sex trafficking case. They have to explain to the jury why this is a criminal act. And I think that's a problem. We cover trials all the time. It's a murder. Everybody knows it's a murder, right? You just have to prove who did it. This is like, wait, why is this racketeering? Why is this sex trafficking? Am I wrong?
Right, yeah, I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for them, especially when it comes to the racketeering, right? That's usually a charge. Again, it involves, the setup of an enterprise, many people involved. A lot of times that's a charge that's tacked on to members of organized crime or the mafia. Here, he's the only one that's being charged with these crimes, so I think the challenge for the prosecution is going to be pointing out who are the other people involved. What they're alleging is that he exerted control, power, and influence over his employees, security guards, other members of his team, to be able to facilitate these acts. And I think that's going to be the challenge for them. And I think that's the key difference here, especially when it comes to the racketeering. And then the challenge, I think, for the, let's say, the prostitution charge, the difference between obviously that and consensual group sex, which is what the defense tried to touch on, is, what happened in between the setups, who was paid, how were they transported? Were they transported from...
All right, Linus. Can you do a segue to today's sponsor?
And this video is brought to you by D-Brand, I guess, right? D-Brand. 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 D-Brand.
In the setups, who was paid, how were they transported? Were they transported from state to state? That's going to be the real big thing that's going to separate the defense saying this was just an unorthodox lifestyle, this is, consensual group sex behind closed doors, versus all the other elements that make up prostitution.
The thin line is coercion. The thin line is coercion, right? Yes. It's the idea if they're doing it willingly or they're talking a legal thorough breakdown of a massive case like Diddy, how could I not also mention legal experts Morgan & Morgan, our sponsor, America's largest injury law firm. So this is a firm in the past few months, Morgan & Morgan, they secured a $9.3 million verdict for a car crash victim in Florida, a $5.6 million verdict for another car accident victim in Atlanta, and not to mention $1.8 million in Kentucky after insurance offered them just $5,000 in that case. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks, and everything from signing contracts, uploading documents, talking to your legal team, can all be done through the phone. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC sidebar. Do you think that's going to be a problem for prosecutors to definitively prove that these people did everything? And we can talk about Cassandra Ventura too, the difficulties the prosecution may have here, that everything she did or any of the other alleged victims did was totally against their will. Not for one night, but a repeated pattern that they kept on doing it.
Right, and that's one of the things that the defense had touched on in their opening statement was they were saying, you know, especially when it comes to Cassandra Ventura, she was in a relationship with him for over 10 years and sort of alluded to this thing of, well, if she wanted to leave him, she could have. She was a willing participant. They're alleging, you know, she helped sort of elicit some of these or procure some of these male escorts, and she had a hand in it. So I think that's going to be the tough thing is how do you draw the line between being a willing participant for many, many years versus being coerced into doing something. And also one thing that the prosecution tried to touch upon was, you know, this allegation of women being drugged, because that's a big thing as well. You know, it's the difference between people coming together to agree to do this consensually versus women being drugged and put under the influence. When you're drugged or put under the influence, you can't consent.
By the way, at the time of our recording this, it's possible Cassandra Ventura may be on the stand or coming on the stand. So, but I think what the issues we're talking about apply to what she testifies to or just the entire case. Because let me just go back to that for a second when we talk about Cassie. I wonder if she's going to have a hard time explaining why she allegedly agreed to do what she did. I mean, we had a man testify yesterday, Daniel Phillip, that he was recruited to have sex with Cassandra Ventura. And I'm going to get more into what he testified to in a minute. But he said he shows up, she's dressed up, she paid him, she texted him. Now, the allegation is this was all under the direction and control of Sean Combs. Or did she make a voluntary choice? The prosecution's relying on her for essentially this whole case, right? I think if we wouldn't see the prosecution right now if she didn't come forward with her initial lawsuit. Is that a problem?
Yeah, so she is a critical witness for the prosecution, hence why they're probably going to put her on so early. And I think the big thing is going to be her testimony and her explaining why she did this. And one of the things that the prosecution touched upon was, yes, she was in this relationship for a long time, she did these things, but it was in an effort to please him. In the beginning, she had done it because, you know, she was in love with this man. And I think they also touch upon, you know, all the different factors of the age difference, the power dynamic, all of that really comes into play. And I think our society, we're at a point where we can understand that a little bit more. But then as time goes on, the distinction the prosecution made was it went from her wanting to please him and she loved him and wanting to keep this relationship to then it started to become coercion and things like, I think they're going to touch on abuse, drugs, all of those allegations, things that were used against her, and also her career. One of the things prosecution said was she was signed to his label. He had a lot more power over her. He dangled this, that's what they're alleging, dangling her career and her career prospects over her so that she would do these things.
How does the defense cross-examine her in a way that it doesn't look like you're beating up on not only an alleged victim, a pregnant alleged victim? She's what, 8.5 months, 9 months?
She's heavily along, yeah. So we don't know for sure, but some photos surfaced of her when she arrived in New York City last week, and she looks pretty significantly far along. And I think that was a smart move for the prosecution to put her on now, because they don't want to be in a situation where if she goes into labor, she's out of pocket. They lose their biggest witness.
They lose their yeah. They can't even find victim 3.
Yeah.
Victim 3, so you lose potentially your 2 major victims in a case like this?
Yeah, it would be awful for the prosecution if they lost Cassie. I think that would be really detrimental. So it's smart that they're putting her on right away.
So how do they do it? How do they be very careful on how they cross-examine her?
Yeah, obviously she's pregnant with her 3rd child, so you want to be sensitive about that. And also, again, now that we're sort of in the post-Me Too era, I think jurors and just the general public are really smart about defense attorneys and how they're using questions that they're using to cross-examine her. So I think they're going to be careful about not using questions about her.
Mando just dropped a new scent, Cedar Grove. I'm about to see what it smells like. Just ordered this brand new stick. Never smelled it before. Little plastic things you can still.
I think they're going to be careful about not using questions about her prior sex life and things like that, tone and how aggressive they are, making sure that they're not kind of appearing that they're shifting the blame on her. I think they're going to probably ask nuanced questions about how long she did this for, why she did it, how many times did she do it. I think those are the things that are going to try to play for them into showing she did this of her own free will and consensually, but at the same time not looking as if they're judging her or anything like that.
And there's a strength in numbers argument for the prosecution because we learned about James, so potentially victim number 2 or alleged victim number 2. Single mom, fell in love, this is again what the prosecution said, single mom fell in love with Combs, forced to perform in these freak-offs, that she was directed with an escort, forced to perform, says that she was beaten. Key witness for what they're alleging here, right? But also a strength in numbers argument. Talk to me about the value of explaining her position in an opening statement and what you think her role is going to be in ultimately this case.
Yeah, well, I think you said it's strength in numbers. I think that's the most important thing. And I think, again, that also plays into the enterprise part of it, right? Because if this was just a charge of, a one-time sexual assault or rape, obviously that's, horrific allegations. But what they're trying to say is this was a system that was set in place for years and years that helped support the racketeering charge. So having multiple victims testify, I think, is really important. And also showing that, it wasn't just exclusive to Cassie. While they were in a 10-year relationship, I think off and on, they had several breaks that other women are purportedly telling the same story. I think that we saw that with the Me Too movement when it came to Harvey Weinstein and all of these other people, that it would be one thing if it was just one allegation from one person, but if it's coming from multiple people, again, the civil lawsuits, although they can't really use that in this case against him, it just helps.
That pattern is very important
Yes.
for the prosecution's case. Let me talk to you about the defense's opening statement from Tenny Garagos. First of all, it was deliberate for Tenny Garagos to deliver the opening statement
Yes.
as opposed to a Mark Agnifilo, right?
Yes, and one of the things that people commented on was that she might not be the most experienced, not in terms of, how great her work is, but in terms of years of experience. But I think it was really deliberate that both sides had women deliver the opening statements. We saw that with Johnny Depp. One of the things Camille Vasquez said was when she did the cross-examination of Amber Heard, that was really important to be able to do that as a female attorney. So I think it was very deliberate. Some of the things that they touched upon, I think we sort of had guessed that was coming. Again, playing into this idea that this was all consensual. He shouldn't be judged for having an unorthodox lifestyle. This is one of the things that they had said was this is a government probe, that the government doesn't belong in his bedroom, essentially. And this is a case, I think they had said this is a case about infidelity, jealousy, and money. So they're trying to frame it as this was, sort of an up and down relationship and, women coming in and out of his life with these claims.
They didn't shy away from it. They basically, when it came to Cassandra Ventura, said, look at her lawsuit, very public lawsuit, 2023. Her lawyer is here, focusing on, they kept coming back and now filing suits. They were jealous of his relationships. I think they made the point, Tenny Garagos made the point in an opening statement, that as soon as Sean Combs allegedly told Cassie that Kim Porter was the love of his life, that's when everything changed. Is that going to be enough?
Right, so that is one of the points that they touched upon was that, she was upset that she wasn't made to be his wife and this was about money. I will say that's a tough argument to make. One is because, again, they settled that lawsuit the day after it was filed. Cassie already received her settlement. We don't know for how much, but I'm guessing it was, not an insignificant number. She doesn't really stand much to gain from this financially by coming forward and testifying. She doesn't come out with a tell-all book or an exclusive interview. She's not really monetizing this, so I think that's a tough sell. And then also, again, this argument that, they came back or it was all about jealousy. I think we have probably a jury in a society that's a little bit more educated on, violent relationships. And that's domestic violence here, and they had to concede to that video.
About that?
Yeah.
They said he's an angry guy, he's a jealous guy, he's engaged in domestic violence. They said it.
Yes.
They said the video, the 2016 video of him reportedly beating Cassandra Ventura is indefensible, but they said domestic violence is not sex trafficking. Interesting strategy there. You think that's going to backfire?
I actually thought that was an intelligent argument to make. They have to do the best they can with what they have. They had to concede to that video because they knew that the prosecution was going to come out with that quickly, and they did. So, I think if they were to shy away from it or try to hide it from the jury, that just wasn't going to fly. So I think they had to come out in front and talk about it. And one of the clear points that they made was, from where the defense is sitting, that video obviously is evidence of domestic violence, which they said, is terrible, and he admits to that, but is it evidence of trafficking? Is it evidence of coercion? The prosecution is saying she was trying to escape one of these alleged freak-offs, therefore it's evidence that she was doing something she didn't want to do, whereas the defense is saying all this video is showing is just horrific domestic violence, yes, but is it evidence of the crimes that are being charged against him now?
And it seemed to me that what the defense has been doing, and what they will continue to do, is to negate every element of the charges, right? It doesn't match up to sex trafficking or racketeering specifically. And so, for example, at least what I saw, they tried to negate all of the underlying crimes of racketeering. So my understanding is you need to prove at least 2 underlying predicate crimes to get to racketeering conspiracy. So, for example, kidnapping, their argument was, talking about an employee of Sean Combs, was working for 10 years. Was he actually kidnapped? Continued to ask to work for him? Drug trafficking, the drugs were for personal use. Arson, he wasn't involved. Forced labor, Combs worked hard, his employees worked hard. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that the defense was kind of trying to touch on with the jury questionnaires last week, which I thought it's always a really great insight as to what the themes of both sides are going to be. They had asked jurors, how do you feel about people that take drugs, that take substances? Again, what they're going to try to prove is this was a wide group of people. They consensually took drugs. Again, this is sort of an unorthodox lifestyle. People coming to these freak-offs of their own free will and volition. That shows no coercion. That shows people weren't drugged, but they took it of their own free choice. Whereas the prosecution is saying all of these elements we're going to prove throughout the trial that, women were drugged. I think they're going to have to rely a lot on personal testimony because, again, where's that hard evidence? A lot of these freak-offs took place behind closed doors. Who knows if Combs got on camera people being drugged or being given allegedly drugs without their knowledge or being slipped something. I doubt that was put on camera. So that's going to be the difficulty, is that they're going to have to rely a lot on personal testimony.
And it does make me wonder if they show videos of sex tapes and you see Sean Combs allegedly directing, do this, do that. Is that enough? Because again, you could say it's part of role playing, it's part of their relationship. I wonder what the value of those tapes are going to be.
Right, yeah, I don't know if that will necessarily be enough. I think we saw in the testimony yesterday with the male escort Daniel Phillip, he had talked about how he was paid and what he was told to do and what he witnessed. I think evidence like that is going to be really key. Evidence of, escorts receiving payments and, how were they transported and where they were transported versus, him necessarily directing a group sex scenario. That might not be enough.
I'll get to Daniel Phillip in a second. You mentioned before the conspiracy, racketeering conspiracy. You needed a criminal agreement, a legal agreement, and then overt acts taken in furtherance of that agreement. This was a conversation that I think we had with Ghislaine Maxwell as well, and it was brought up yesterday. How do you have a conspiracy? You need at least 2 people. Who is he conspiring with? He's the only one charged in this case. And maybe it's still early on to know, but I imagine the prosecution has to bring on people who help facilitate and coordinate this alleged criminal activity, and yet aren't they going to be questioned, why are you not criminally charged? Did you work out a deal? I wonder if that's a problem again for the prosecution.
Right, so I think what we're going to see a lot of is testimony coming from members of his team, so employees, chiefs of staff, security guards. We saw a little bit, even though he wasn't under Diddy's employment, the hotel security officer who was working at the time of the 2016 incident between him and Cassie. I think we're going to see a lot of that because, again, to show an enterprise and racketeering, you have to show a wide group of people. So they're going to bring out a lot of those kinds of folks, I think. And then also one of the things that they have to show is he exerted power and control over them. So what did he pay them? Were there threats used? What kind of force did he use to really, push this through?
I will tell you, in terms of the defense, I don't think they have much of a defense when it comes to transportation to engage in prostitution. That charge, 2 charges there. Transporting people with the intent that they engage in sex work, you're looking at a max of 10 years in prison. Because in opening,
Close that
as
front
far as I
door.
understood, Tenny Garrigo said he was paying people
I'll be
for
right
time
back.
and experience.
Really? And you can kind of argue, not to be unprofessional, but isn't that what people are paying prostitution or sex workers for? Their time and technically their experience. So I know she was trying to kind of frame it as an informal, agreement. And again, these were people coming together consensually. But is that not evidence of prostitution? Again, you're paying individuals for their time and experience and to perform a certain act.
I will say, I thought the prosecution began their case brilliantly. Okay? They didn't call Cassandra Ventura as the first witness. Nope. They started with arguably the most important piece of evidence in this case from what we've seen. The first witness even laid the foundation for that. The 2016 videotape of Combs purportedly beating Cassandra Ventura in an LA Continental hotel hallway. And really, you're talking about 2 cell phone videos and multiple hotel surveillance videos. And to me, it seems that they started that way to build up the credibility of Cassandra Ventura, who will testify next, right? Because the way I see it is when Cassie filed her lawsuit in 2023, first time we ever heard anything about this, I think people could look and be like, how do we know this is legit or not, right? Then the tape comes out. And for me, it not only, and I think for a lot of people, not only corroborated that particular portion of her complaint, but I think you can make the argument it corroborated everything she was saying. So do you think the prosecution was deliberate here in how they started the case?
Completely. So I think it was really critical for them to introduce that video, and I think they did it in a smart way because, again, Cassandra Ventura is expected to testify very soon, so they want to make sure that they're set up in introducing that video. They want to bring it out, play it for the jury. There's a motion that was ruled several weeks ago where the judge said, yes, this can be played for the jury, and they also want to make sure they question a witness who has direct knowledge of it. So the security officer, I believe his name is Israel Flores, he was called to, basically handle that situation. He filed an incident report about it. So they want to make sure they're questioning someone who has knowledge of it. And, they might not necessarily want to replay that video when Cassie's taking the stand, but they want to make sure that they introduce it and set it up.
Let's talk about him real quick. So first witness was former security guard Israel Flores, LAPD officer. Wonder if that is a built-in credibility there because of his position. Authenticated the tapes, testified that he got this call that there was a woman in distress, saw Combs and Cassie, that Combs tried to bribe him with a wad of cash, allegedly saying, don't tell nobody, saw Cassie with a purple eye, filed a report, didn't call the police, recorded the security video on his cell phone to show his wife, even said at one point that he pinned Combs to the wall after Combs allegedly grabbed another security guard's phone. On cross-examination, he was questioned, Combs didn't attack you, no one contacted police, you didn't put certain details in your report. What did you make overall of his testimony?
Yeah, so I think his testimony was, again, really, really critical. He was called to investigate this incident after it happened. Someone reported, again, Cassie Ventura being in distress. So he was able to talk about what he witnessed, how they behaved. Again, the bribe of Combs bribing him, which he said he didn't take, was a really, really key, critical part because, again, it points to this, even though he wasn't under Combs's employment, this overall, process of him trying to allegedly bribe people or pay people off with cash that helped support the racketeering charge. So I think that was really critical. And what was interesting on cross was the defense was taking a strategy that defense attorneys have to do. That's what they're paid to do, which is try to chip away at the credibility. So one of the things they asked him was, well, why was all of this testimony that you're talking about today, why was it not included in the incident report? Which is a fair question, but, I think, again, that incident happened years ago. You can't necessarily put everything that happened into a report, but I think it was an interesting marker of them trying to chip away at the credibility of this witness.
And then we had Daniel Phillip. So this male performer testified about being paid to have sex with Cassie. Combs was allegedly directing their sexual performances, rubbing baby oil, role-playing, Combs pleasuring himself while this is going on, recording them, talked about red couches, Astroglide, lubricant, Combs apparently being dressed up in a bandana covering his face. Very, very detailed. But also said he observed Cassie on drugs, believes he heard Combs slapping her, saw her being dragged by Sean Combs, her allegedly saying, I'm sorry to Sean Combs. Also testified that Combs allegedly threw a bottle of liquor at her. Then there was this odd point where he testified that Combs took a picture of his ID for insurance. And then on cross, about whether or not he was a stripper or dancer when he was assigned to perform for Ventura and Combs. That was an interesting part of the cross-examination. What did you take away from his testimony and the value of his testimony?
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating. So I think two things there. One is I think the prosecution really wanted to spare no excruciating detail to the jury. I think part of what they wanted to do was sort of knock Combs off of his pedestal. A lot of people could argue that's already been done with what has happened the past year.
I would
but
think
I think
so.
Wanting to include all of those really painful and horrific details was important. And then two, I think his testimony was critical in, again, trying to prove the trafficking charge, that this was coercive acts. This wasn't something that she engaged in voluntarily. So when he talked about being paid, he witnessed Combs allegedly throwing items at her, dragging her by her hair, her saying, I'm sorry. All of this was evidence, and especially allegations of her being drugged. All of this is to show this wasn't a consensual consensual act, but this was trafficking. And the cross-examination was really interesting. I think one of the things that his defense attorney had asked her was, well, did it appear that she enjoyed it? And again, they kept trying to emphasize on this theme of consent and saying, well, if she appeared to enjoy it, if she appeared, they had asked, is she physically stimulated? You know, I'm trying to say in the most G-rated way. But all of that goes to show that they keep trying to push on this idea of consent, and this is something she wanted, whereas his main testimony and what prosecution is pushing forward is these weren't consensual acts. This helps to prove the trafficking charge, that this wasn't something she wanted.
And I'm sure the defense will jump on the fact that she was the one who texted him. She was the one who's dressed up, that she was a willing participant in all of this. There was a part in the cross-examination, I want to finish up with this, where it was almost like he didn't want money for being with Cassie and Combs. There was a part where he said, in my head, I was just excited I was in this world and happy to be involved with people of such notoriety. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that was interesting that he was so honest about that someone would forego money just to be in the presence of these people. But I think that really kind of ties into what the prosecution first said in their opening statement is, yes, Sean Combs is this mogul and he's larger than life, but he had a whole other side to him. And again, trying to sort of knock him off of his pedestal. And look, people are human. Witnesses, jurors, you know, they might get starstruck, even given all of the allegations and things we've seen of Diddy. He's been someone that's been in the public eye for years and years. So it didn't surprise me that he thought that, but it did surprise me that he was so honest about it.
Again, shout out to Long
It's
Crime.
something I think we're going to see the prosecution doing over and over again is saying, trying to knock him off his pedestal, basically.
Elizabeth Vulai, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And that's all we have.
Again, thank you to Long Crime, and I hope that y'all enjoy the content. See y'all later.